I never expected that a plumbing emergency would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Most of the time, life feels like a series of meticulously planned events, a checklist of responsibilities and routines you work through day by day. You wake up, you drink your coffee, you go to work, you come home. But then something breaks, a pipe, a plan, a preconceived notion, and suddenly, you are somewhere you never expected to be, with someone you never thought you would know. That is how my life went from a quiet, predictable solo to a messy, beautiful, and utterly unpredictable duet. My name is Lucas. At the time, I was 28, and my world was largely confined to the glowing rectangle of my computer screen and the four walls of my one-bedroom apartment. I worked from home as a web developer, a job that suited my quiet, observant nature perfectly. My days were ordered by lines of code and the gentle hum of my PC. My apartment was my sanctuary, a place where everything had its place, a reflection of the orderly, low-stakes life I had carefully constructed for myself. It was safe. It was comfortable. And if I was being truly honest with myself in the quiet hours of the night, it was profoundly lonely. My building was an old brick walk-up, the kind with charming imperfections like creaky floors and radiators that hissed like angry snakes in the winter. The walls were thin enough that you learned the rhythms of your neighbors' lives. The couple below me who argued about reality television, the elderly woman above me who listened to classical music every afternoon. I liked the ambient noise of their lives. It was a form of company without the pressure of actual interaction. Then Julian moved in across the hall. I watched from my peephole, a habit I am not particularly proud of, as he and a couple of friends hauled boxes and furniture up the 3 flights of stairs. He was immediately, undeniably captivating. He was tall, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his simple gray t-shirt, and his arms were a roadmap of veins and defined muscle. His dark hair was a little messy from the effort, and when he laughed at something one of his friends said, the sound was deep and genuine, and it seemed to echo in the narrow hallway. My brain, in its well-practiced act of self-preservation, immediately filed him away in the completely unattainable category. He had the easy confidence of a man who moved through the world without much resistance, the kind of casual, friendly charisma that I had always admired from a very safe distance. He was the handsome, friendly, and almost certainly straight neighbor. I decided my interactions with him would be limited to polite nods in the hallway and the occasional hello by the mailboxes. It was a strategy designed to protect my own fragile peace. Over the next few weeks, I learned a little more about him in bits and pieces. He left for work early each morning, often carrying a dusty tool bag and wearing sturdy-looking work boots. I figured he was in construction or something similar. He was quiet, for the most part, but I would sometimes hear the low thrum of music from his apartment in the evenings, usually classic rock or old soul. He always smiled if we passed each other, a quick, friendly flash of white teeth that did funny things to my stomach. I held fast to my policy of polite distance, even as a part of me cataloged every small detail I could glean about the man across the hall. And so, our separate routines continued, running on parallel tracks that only briefly intersected in the shared space of our hallway. My life remained orderly, quiet, and solitary. I told myself I was content. It is amazing the things you can convince yourself of when the alternative seems too frightening to consider. I had no idea that a burst pipe was about to send a wrecking ball through the carefully constructed walls of my solitude. It happened on a Tuesday night. I was winding down, getting ready for bed, when a frantic knocking echoed from my front door. It was nearly 11 o'clock, far too late for a casual visitor. My heart jumped into my throat. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. It was Julian. He was soaking wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, and he had a look of sheer panic on his face. I opened the door, and the first thing that hit me was the sound, a rushing, gushing noise coming from his apartment. "I am so sorry to bother you this late," he said, his voice strained. "But my bathroom is, well, it is a water park right now. A pipe burst under the sink, and I can't get the main shutoff to turn." I could see past him into his open doorway. Water was already seeping out, darkening the hallway carpet. "Oh my God," I said, my own sense of calm evaporating. "Okay, the building super. We need to call Mr. Henderson." I fumbled for my phone, my fingers suddenly clumsy. Julian was already dialing. While he was on the phone, Explaining the situation in clipped, urgent tones, I grabbed every towel I owned and started trying to build a makeshift dam in front of his door to keep the water from spreading further down the hall. Mr. Henderson, our portly and perpetually grumpy building superintendent, arrived about 20 minutes later. He managed to shut off the water to Julian's apartment, but the damage was already done. The floor was flooded, his bathroom was a wreck, and the smell of damp drywall was already starting to fill the air. Mr. Henderson shook his head, looking grim. This is bad. Real bad. It's going to take at least a week to fix this. We'll have to tear out the floor, dry everything out. You can't stay here. The fumes from the sealant alone will be toxic. Julian just stood there, dripping in the middle of the hallway, looking utterly defeated. He ran a hand through his wet hair, and for the first time since I had met him, that easy confidence was gone. He just looked tired and overwhelmed. He mumbled something about a hotel, or maybe staying with a friend across town. And that is when I heard myself speak, the words leaving my mouth before my cautious brain could stop them. You can stay with me, I said. Both Julian and Mr. Henderson turned to look at me. I felt my face flush. It was a reckless offer. I barely knew him. My apartment was my sanctuary, the one place I had complete control. But looking at Julian, standing there looking so lost, I felt a strange and powerful protective urge. I stammered, trying to backpedal slightly. It's not much. I don't have a guest room, just the couch. But it's better than nothing, if you need a place for a few days. Julian looked at me, his eyes wide with surprise, and then flooding with a gratitude that was so potent it almost knocked me backward. Are you serious? He asked, his voice soft. I couldn't possibly impose like that. It's not an imposition, I insisted, the words feeling more true as I said them. It's what neighbors do. Right. I offered a small, hopefully reassuring smile. He stared at me for a long moment, and then a slow, tired smile spread across his face. It was different from his usual quick grin. This one was softer, more vulnerable. Thank you, Lucas, he said, using my name for the first time. Seriously, you are a lifesaver. And just like that, the barrier between our two parallel lives dissolved. My carefully ordered world was about to have a house guest. The first night was a blur of logistics. We salvaged what we could from his apartment, a duffel bag of clothes, his toiletries, his laptop, and a worn leather-bound sketchbook that he seemed particularly protective of. We laid my spare towels and blankets across the floor of his apartment to soak up the worst of the water. By the time we were done, it was well past 1 in the morning, and we were both exhausted. I made up the couch for him with my best sheets and a spare pillow. It was strange, watching him move around my living room, my personal space. He seemed to take up so much more room than I did, not just physically, but with his very presence. The quiet hum of my apartment was replaced by the sound of his breathing, the rustle of him getting settled on the couch. It was unnerving and, in a way I could not quite define, oddly comforting. The next morning, the awkwardness began to set in. I woke up to the smell of coffee. Julian was already up, standing in my small kitchen, wearing a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt that had likely been dry when he put them on, but was now damp from the general humidity of the situation. He had made a full pot of coffee. Morning, he said, offering me a mug. Figured it was the least I could do. I hope you do not mind. I just used what was by the machine. He looked so out of place next to my neat, minimalist countertops, like a mountain had suddenly sprung up in my kitchen. No, not at all. Thank you, I said, my voice still thick with sleep. We stood there for a moment in silence, sipping our coffee, two relative strangers sharing the intimate ritual of a new morning. The space between us felt charged with unspoken rules of cohabitation we had yet to write. How much noise was too much noise? Were we supposed to eat meals together? It was like the first day of a school project with a randomly assigned partner. Julian had to leave for work, and I retreated to the familiar comfort of my desk and my code. But the day felt different. I was acutely aware that I was no longer alone. His duffel bag sat by the front door. A damp towel, his towel, was hung over one of my dining chairs to dry. His scent, something clean and woodsy, like sawdust and soap, lingered in the air. My sanctuary had been gently invaded, and I found I did not mind nearly as much as I thought I would. Over the next few days, we fell into a tentative rhythm. He was gone most of the day, and I worked. But we shared the mornings and the evenings. I learned that he liked his coffee black and that he hummed, often tunelessly, when he was doing something like brushing his teeth or looking for his keys. He learned that I could not cook to save my life, a fact that became apparent when I nearly set my smoke alarm off trying to make pasta. He laughed, a full-bellied sound that made my chest feel warm, and then gently took the spatula from my hand. "How about I handle dinner from now on?" he offered. And he did. He was an amazing cook, able to whip up delicious meals from the random assortment of things in my pantry. We started eating dinner together at my small table, talking about our days. The conversations were simple at first: work, the weather, the slow progress on his apartment repairs. But gradually, they deepened. I found that beneath his confident exterior, Julian was thoughtful and surprisingly observant. He asked me about my work, not just the polite, "What do you do?" but real, insightful questions about the logic of coding and the creativity involved in design. He listened, truly listened, when I answered. I felt seen in a way I had not realized I was missing. The turning point, the moment I saw the first real glimpse behind the curtain, came one evening about 4 days into his stay. I was working late on a difficult project, staring at my screen until the lines of code blurred together. Julian was sitting on the couch, quietly occupied. I assumed he was on his phone or watching something on his laptop. When I finally gave up for the night and stretched, my back groaning in protest, I saw what he was doing. He had that leather sketchbook open on his lap and was drawing with intense concentration, a charcoal pencil moving swiftly across the page. He was so absorbed, he did not notice I was watching him. "What are you drawing?" I asked softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, a little surprised, and then a faint blush crept up his neck. "Oh, nothing. Just messing around." He started to close the book, but I moved closer, my curiosity piqued. "Can I see?" I asked. He hesitated for a second, then nodded and turned the sketchbook towards me. I was expecting doodles, maybe a landscape or two. But the page was filled with the most exquisite, intricate designs for furniture. A chair that curved like a sculpted piece of driftwood. A bookshelf that seemed to grow up the wall like a vine. They were more than just furniture. They were works of art. "Julian, these are incredible," I breathed, genuinely stunned. "You designed these?" A shy smile touched his lips. "Yeah, it is what I do. I am a custom furniture maker. I design and build everything myself." He flipped through the pages, showing me more designs, and as he talked about the different types of wood, the challenges of joinery, the way a piece should feel to the touch, his whole demeanor changed. The easygoing, confident frontman was replaced by a passionate, deeply engaged artist. His eyes lit up, and his voice was filled with a reverence that was captivating. "I thought you were in construction," I admitted. He chuckled. "I guess I sort of am. But this is the part one love. The creating. The rest is just noise." We sat there on the floor for over an hour, looking through his designs. He told me about his dream of one day opening his own small shop, about the grandfather who taught him how to work with wood. In that moment, he was not the unattainable guy from across the hall anymore. He was Julian, a man with dreams and a hidden, beautiful talent. A man who was letting me see a part of him he clearly did not show to just anyone. My carefully constructed defenses were beginning to crumble, replaced by a feeling of connection that was both exhilarating and terrifying. It was the next morning when it happened. One of those small, insignificant moments that somehow manages to hold more weight than 1,000 grand gestures. We were both in the kitchen, a space far too small for two grown men to navigate at the same time, especially before coffee had fully kicked in. I was getting a bowl from the cupboard, and he was reaching into the fridge for the milk. We moved at the same time, a clumsy, uncoordinated dance. I turned as he reached, and our hands brushed against each other. It was nothing, a fleeting contact of skin on skin that lasted less than a second. But a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. It was like a static shock, but deeper, resonating somewhere in my chest. I pulled my hand back as if I had been burned. I looked up at him, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. His eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of something in them. Surprise, confusion, something else I could not name. He pulled his own hand back just as quickly, his cheeks turning a shade darker. The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched for what felt like an eternity, filled with the low hum of the refrigerator and the frantic beat of my own pulse. The air between us felt thick, charged with a new and startling awareness. Then he cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Sorry, he mumbled, not quite meeting my eyes. He stepped back, gesturing towards the fridge. You go ahead. He busied himself with finding a mug, his movements suddenly a little stiff, a little too deliberate. I grabbed the milk, my hand trembling slightly. Neither of us said another word. But something had shifted. The comfortable, platonic bubble we had been building around our strange cohabitation had just been popped. And I spent the rest of the day replaying that tiny, accidental touch in my mind, wondering if I had imagined the spark, or if he had felt it too. It was a single, tiny moment, but it was enough to ignite a fragile, dangerous flicker of hope inside me. The water heater in my apartment chose, with a sense of truly impeccable dramatic timing, to die the next evening. One moment I was looking forward to a hot shower to wash away the stress of a looming project deadline, and the next I was standing in front of my faucet, turning the knob back and forth, getting nothing but stubbornly, frigidly cold water. A call to Mr. Henderson confirmed my fate. He could not get a plumber out until the following afternoon. Just one of those things, he'd said with a distinct lack of sympathy. Building's old. When Julian got home from his workshop, smelling of cedar and sweat, I broke the news to him. He just laughed. Of course it did. This apartment is cursed this week. Man, he dropped his tool bag by the door. Well, good thing the hot water in my place still works, even if the floors are torn up. I checked it this morning. You can use my shower. His offer was practical, logical, and yet the thought of it sent a nervous flutter through my stomach. The idea of being in his space, his bathroom, felt intimate in a way that him being in my space had not. But the alternative was an ice-cold shower, so I gratefully accepted. Later that evening, after he had showered and was settled on the couch with his sketchbook, I gathered my things. It was strange walking across the hall into his apartment. The living room was in disarray, with furniture covered in plastic sheets and the flooring pulled up to reveal the bare subfloor. But his bathroom, though dusty, was intact. The hot water was a miracle. The steam filled the small room, fogging up the mirror and creating a warm, insulating cocoon. It was a relief to finally wash away the tension of the day. As I was drying off, I did a quick mental inventory. One body, one set of clean clothes, and one clean towel. I had brought over my last one. Julian had used the other one I'd given him, and it was now in the laundry hamper. It was a large, fluffy bath sheet, but it was decidedly singular. My stomach twisted with a fresh wave of awkwardness. This was ridiculous. We were two adults. But every interaction since the hand-brushing incident had been tinged with a new, delicate carefulness. I wrapped the towel around my waist, tucked the corner in securely, and took a deep breath before opening the bathroom door. Julian looked up from his sketchbook as I stepped out into the living room, a cloud of steam billowing out behind me. "Feel better?" he asked, his eyes briefly flicking down and then back up to my face. "So much better," I said, trying to sound casual. "But, there's a slight problem." I gestured vaguely with my hand. I only brought one towel. It's the last clean one I have until I do laundry tomorrow." My face was burning. I felt like an idiot. I expected him to laugh it off, to say it was no problem, that he would just air dry or find an old t-shirt. Instead, a slow, deliberate smile spread across his face. It was a knowing sort of smile, one that made the air feel thin and hard to breathe. He closed his sketchbook, set it aside, and stood up. He walked towards me, closing the distance between us until he was standing just a foot away. The heat from his body seemed to radiate across the small gap. He was shirtless, wearing just his sleep pants, and I could see the definition of his chest and abdomen in the dim light of the lamp. My mouth went dry. "Well," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we cannot have that." And then he did something that completely short-circuited my brain. He reached out, his fingers warm against my skin, and took hold of the corner of the towel tucked at my hip. He did not pull it off. Instead, he slowly began to unwrap it, not to expose me, but to include himself. He guided the length of plush cotton around his own hips, stepping closer and closer until our bodies were almost touching, until his hip was pressed against mine. He drew the fabric taut around both of us, a single white band encircling our waists, and then tucked the corner securely at his side. He did not let go. His hand rested there, his fingers splayed against the towel at his hip, effectively anchoring us together. We were standing there, In the middle of his disaster of a living room, two half-naked men connected by a single piece of fabric. The fresh, clean scent of my soap on my skin mingled with the woodsy scent of his. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I could feel the warmth of his skin through the thin material. I looked up at him, my breath caught in my throat. He was already looking at me, his gaze intense, searching. The playful smile was gone, replaced by something raw and vulnerable. "See," he whispered, his voice husky. "Problem solved." But it was not solved. It was the beginning of a much larger, more complicated, and infinitely more terrifying problem. The space between us crackled with a tension so thick I felt like I could taste it. It was a moment suspended in time, fragile and electric. He had not just shared a towel. He had deliberately, unequivocally, erased the last bit of distance between us. And I had absolutely no idea what to do next. He eventually let go. The moment, as charged and infinite as it had felt, broke. He stepped back, unfastening the towel from his own waist and leaving it securely around mine. The sudden cold air where his body had been was a shock. I'll just grab an old shirt to use," he said, his voice sounding a little strained. He did not look at me as he turned and disappeared into his bedroom. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Then I practically fled back to my own apartment, my heart still hammering. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it as if to keep the overwhelming implications of that single moment at bay. It was no use. The feeling of his hip pressed against mine, the warmth of his fingers, the intensity in his eyes, it was all seared into my memory. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over again. It was a highlight reel of my own anxiety and hope. 1 minute, I was convinced it was a sign, a deliberate move to show me he was interested. The towel, the closeness, the look in his eyes, it had to mean something, right? He was closing the gap, testing the waters, showing me in a way that was less terrifying than words. But then the fear would creep in, whispering its poisonous doubts. Maybe it was just a joke. Maybe he was just incredibly comfortable with his own body, one of those guys who had no concept of personal space. Maybe he was just being playful, and I, with my lonely, hopeful heart, was inflating it into something it was not. The thought was mortifying. I imagined him telling his friends about it, laughing about his weird, uptight neighbor who freaked out over a little joke. The pendulum swung wildly between soaring hope and crushing self-doubt, leaving me exhausted and no closer to an answer. The next day was an exercise in excruciating awkwardness. We moved around each other like two dancers who had forgotten the steps to a familiar routine. The easy camaraderie we had built was gone, replaced by a stilted politeness. Our conversations were clipped and focused on safe, neutral topics. "Did you sleep okay? The coffee's ready. Looks like it might rain today." We avoided eye contact, and if our hands brushed by accident, we both flinched away as if from an electric fence. I tried to analyze his every move for clues. A glance that lingered for a fraction of a second too long sent my hopes skyrocketing. A sentence that ended too abruptly sent them crashing back to earth. He seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. Was he regretting what he did? Was he embarrassed? Or was he, like me, caught in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other person to make the next move? The tension was a third person in the apartment, sitting on the couch with us, eating at the dinner table, a silent, heavy presence that made it hard to breathe. I was going crazy, trapped in the echo chamber of my own head, dissecting every word, every gesture, every loaded silence. The uncertainty was eating me alive. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, terrified to jump, but equally terrified to turn back. Julian's apartment, it turned out, was going to be ready sooner than expected. Mr. Henderson had managed to get a crew in who worked quickly. The new flooring was down, the drywall was patched, and all that was left was a final coat of paint. He would be able to move back in 2 days. The news landed like a lead weight in my stomach. It was a deadline. A countdown clock had just started ticking on this strange, temporary life we were living. Soon, he would be back across the hall, and the fragile, tenuous connection we had formed would be stretched across that distance. If I did not say something, if he did not say something, this whole week of shared meals and late-night talks and one electrifying moment with a towel would just evaporate. We would go back to being polite neighbors, and the thought was unbearable. The final night of his stay arrived, heavy with unspoken words. We ate dinner in near silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. I could feel my window of opportunity closing, my courage failing me with every passing second. I decided to let it go. It was easier, safer, to retreat back into my shell than to risk the monumental rejection I was sure was coming. After dinner, I was rinsing the dishes, my back to him, when he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, tentative. "Lucas, can we talk for a minute?" I turned off the water, my heart leaping into my throat. I dried my hands on a dish towel, my movements slow and deliberate, trying to calm the frantic fluttering in my chest. I turned to face him. He was standing by the living room window, looking out at the city lights, his shoulders tense. "Sure," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He took a deep breath, still not looking at me. I'm really grateful for you letting me stay here this week. You really saved me." "It was no problem," I said, the words sounding hollow and inadequate. He finally turned to face me, and his expression was one I had never seen on him before. He looked nervous, vulnerable, his usual confidence completely stripped away. That's not all I wanted to say." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I was starting to recognize. "This is going to sound crazy, and maybe I'm totally wrong about this, but I have to just say it." He took another breath. "The pipe bursting was real, I swear. But I could have stayed with my friend. He has a spare room," he offered. I stared at him, my mind struggling to compute his words. "What? Then why?" "Because I wanted to stay here," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine, pleading for me to understand. "With you. Lucas, I have been trying to work up the nerve to talk to you for months. Ever since I moved in, I would see you in the hall, and you'd give me this little shy smile, and I don't know, I just wanted to know you." My entire world tilted on its axis. All my fears, all my assumptions about him being straight and unattainable, were just wrong. "I'm not good at this stuff," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "Words. So when you offered me your couch, I saw it as a chance to just be near you, to see if this feeling was real." He looked down at his hands. "And the whole thing with the towel the other night, that was stupid. I know. I was trying to show you how I felt without saying it, because I was terrified you'd just think I was a creep. I was trying to be bold, and I think I just made things weird and awkward." A laugh escaped my lips. It was a shaky, watery sound, filled with a week's worth of pent-up anxiety and a tidal wave of relief. "Weird and awkward," I echoed. "Julian, I have spent the last 48 hours convinced I was completely insane, that I had imagined the whole thing." A flicker of hope ignited in his eyes. You felt it too?" "Felt it." I took a step closer to him, the fear finally, blessedly, gone. "Julian, it's all I've been able to think about. I thought I was the only 1 inch." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching the sun break through the clouds. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips, reaching all the way to his eyes. "So I'm not crazy," he breathed. "No," I said, my own smile finally breaking free. "You're not crazy." He closed the remaining distance between us in a single step. He reached up, his hand gently cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. His touch was hesitant, questioning. I leaned into it, closing my eyes for a second, savoring the contact I had been dreaming of. When I opened them, he was looking at me with so much warmth, so much feeling, it stole my breath away. And then he kissed me. It was not like in the movies. There was no soaring music, no dramatic camera angles. It was quiet and gentle and real. It was a kiss that was full of all the unspoken words, all the nervous tension, all the hopeful longing of the past week. It was tentative at first, a question, and I answered by kissing him back, my hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. It was a confirmation, an agreement, a beginning. When we finally pulled apart, we just stood there, resting our foreheads against each other, breathing the same air. "I was so scared," he whispered. "Me too," I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. But I was not scared anymore. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Julian moved back into his apartment the next day, but in reality, he never really left. The 4 feet of hallway that separated our doors became a meaningless distance. Most nights, he would end up at my place, or I at his. His apartment, once a symbol of his separate life, slowly became our shared space. My minimalist decor was soon joined by a beautifully crafted end table he made for the living room, and a small, vibrant plant he insisted would liven the place up. He was right. We fell into the easy, comfortable rhythm of a couple. We went on dates, to museums, to hole-in-the-wall restaurants he knew about, to walk in the park on sunny afternoons. I visited his workshop, a large, dusty space that smelled perpetually of sawdust and varnish. I watched, mesmerized, as he took a raw piece of wood and transformed it into something beautiful and functional. He saw the artistry in his work, and he taught me to see it, too. In turn, he would sit beside me while I worked, watching the lines of code fill my screen. He did not understand the language, but he said he loved watching the focus on my face, the way I would bite my lip when I was trying to solve a complex problem. He saw the creativity in my logic, the design in my structure. He saw me, all of me, and he did not seem to want me to be anyone else. The quiet solitude of my life was replaced by a comfortable, happy noise. The sound of his key in the lock at the end of the day. The low rumble of his laughter as we watched a movie on the couch. The sound of 2 toothbrushes being used at the same time in the morning. My carefully ordered world had been thrown into a beautiful, wonderful chaos, and I had never been happier. A few months later, we were getting ready for the day in my bathroom. It was a lazy Saturday morning, the sun streaming through the small window. Julian had just gotten out of the shower, and a comfortable steam filled the room. I was brushing my teeth, and I watched his reflection in the mirror. He looked happy, relaxed. He belonged here. I finished up and handed him a towel from the rack. He took it, but instead of just wrapping it around his waist, he paused. A familiar, playful glint appeared in his eyes. He unfolded the towel to its full width, and just as he had done all those months ago, he wrapped it around both of us, pulling me flush against his warm, damp body. He leaned in and gave me a slow, soft kiss, tasting of minty toothpaste and a future I was so excited to live. He pulled back just enough to look me in the eye. "You know," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. "I think sharing is better, don't you?" I laughed, wrapping my arms around his neck. "Yeah," I said, my heart feeling so full it might just burst. "I definitely do. It is funny, isn't it? How you can spend so much of your life building walls to keep yourself safe, carefully curating a world that is predictable and free from risk. You think that is what contentment is. But life's greatest gifts often come disguised as disasters. A burst pipe, a broken water heater, a disruption to the routine. They force you to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to offer it. And sometimes, the simple, terrifying act of stepping out of your comfort zone, of sharing your space, of even sharing a single towel, can lead you home.